Well, hello there, fellow traveler, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is the first time stumbling upon it. Today, I thought I would do a painting session and talk about some of my thoughts on the first 5 seasons of The Walking Dead. So, right up front, I'm going to let you know this is a heavy spoilers video. If you, for some reason, have not watched any of the 11 seasons or sideshows of The Walking Dead, perhaps put this video on mute and play your own music in the background while you watch me sketch. But if you've already watched it, please feel free, stay here. Everything I say is purely opinion and conjecture. I just wanted to talk about it, because why the hell not? Without further ado, let's get into it. Full disclosure, I'm not referencing the comic because LOL, even though I love comics and I'm an aspiring comic artist, I haven't actually read the comics yet. It's on my list. But I didn't feel that it was really important for this video because my favorite character is Daryl, which I have been informed is not a character in the comics. So it doesn't really serve a purpose me talking about it. Okay, so The Walking Dead first premiered on October 31st, 2010, and my brother, sister, and I were absolutely obsessed with this. I was 14 at the time, and I don't remember watching it when it premiered, but what I do remember is that when the first season came out on DVD, yes, this was still the time when DVDs were a thing. For any of the kids who don't know what that is, it was crazy, okay? But we went over to Target and we bought the first DVD and we were glued in front of the TV. We were watching this. Like, I remember my anxiety being up, okay? It was like, it's like PTSD when you remember it. You can't forget it. I remember my mom walking into the room. I don't remember what episode we were on, but my mom came into the room and she took one look at the TV screen and she said to all 3 of us, she said, "You guys should not be watching this." And you know how there are arguments that the child will never win against their parent? And then there are some arguments that the parent will never win against the child. Well, all 3 of us looked at Mom and we said, respectfully, Mom, you don't understand. We have to keep on watching this. Like, Rick just got trapped in a tank and there's a bunch of walkers and they're eating the horse. Or, Mom, you don't understand. We bombarded her with way too much information. Like, way too much info. She just kind of put her hands up and said, okay. And she just walked out of the room. I love you, Mom. So there are only 6 episodes in the first season, so you can imagine that we quickly got through that entire DVD. But then we began this ritual every week where it would come out, like every episode would come out on the channel every week. So my siblings and I would always sit in front of the TV whenever it premiered. I want to say it was on like a Tuesday night. I can't quite remember though. But normally our dad had control over the TV and we kind of just let Dad do whatever. But all 3 of us were like, Dad, can we please watch The Walking Dead? You know, and Dad would be like, okay, whatever. But thanks, Dad, for that. We appreciate having that sibling bonding moment. You foregoing watching your Western movies on the TV or your action movies. Very much appreciated. But this was such an integral part of my childhood. My sister and I, we would just randomly look at each other and say, let's go get Bob. And we get in a back and forth, let's go get Bob. Yeah, we gotta go get Bob. We have to go get Bob. So again, if you've watched it, you know what part I'm referencing. Or the not so happy part, right? When Beth loses Daryl and he's chasing after the car. Beth! My sister and I love Norman Reedus. Do I say it Norman Reedus? Norman Reedus? You know who I'm talking about. But my sister and I would go, Beth! And we'd be yelling at each other wherever we were. Beth! Beth! Like, it was so dumb. But those are very happy childhood memories for me, which is kind of ironic because this is The Walking Dead we're talking about. You know, people are getting eaten alive and it's the end of the world. But you know what? I like to make positive out of horrendous things. Who doesn't? I also have a pretty morbid sense of humor, but that's not the topic of this video. You know that phrase, if Daryl dies, we riot? Like, I immediately felt that. Daryl was always my favorite. A very integral childhood memory for me was walking into Hot Topic. Yes, I love Hot Topic, and if Hot Topic ever wants me to make some merch for them or wants to sponsor me, your girl's here. But I walked into Hot Topic and I saw a pair of socks that said, "If Daryl dies, we riot." And my brother bought it for me. And I remember when I saw it, the first thing that went through my head, somebody else feels the exact same way I do about Daryl? Yes! It's nice to be validated and not to be the only one. Something I have to ever so unfortunately point out, though, is that I actually stopped watching this at the 5th season. I remember when I got to, I think it's the 5th episode, when they unalive Beth, I completely lost interest. So I actually haven't watched all the way through to the 11th season. So then if your question then becomes, well, why are you talking about it right now? Well, I'm in process of rewatching it. I think I'm a little halfway through the 7th season now. What initially prompted this was I started watching the Daryl Dixon show. Impeccable. What can I say? They just came out with the 3rd season of that. So that's kind of what prompted me to talk about it right now, because then maybe I'll end up doing another video on the Daryl Dixon show, but I'm definitely going to be doing some more fan art of it. I digress. So then the structure for the rest of this video is going to be me loosely going over each of the plot points per season and then talking about the different character interactions and what I like and or what I don't like about them. Spoiler alert for all your spoilers, I start not liking it in the 5th season. Everything before that I think is great. Okay, let's get into it. So The Walking Dead starts off with the first episode, Days Gone By, and I have to say, this opening is absolutely iconic, and I don't know if it's referencing 28 Days Later or 28 Days Later is referencing it, but that whole idea of your main character waking up in a hospital and the apocalypse has just happened is absolutely insane and one of the most impactful things, especially because hospitals are where people go to get better. But it's kind of a catch-22 because that's where most of the sickness is located. So when you're quarantining people to a certain area that are all sick, that area is kind of unsafe in and of itself, even though that's the safe zone because that's where you can get healed. I don't know. Anybody else have weird thoughts on hospitals? Rick wakes up in the hospital. The thing that I really appreciate about Rick's character and why I think Rick is a good character to be following is because A, he's a father, but B, he's a police officer. What's a police officer's job? Well, the police officer's job is to uphold law and order. Well, what the hell happens when there's no more laws and there sure as shit isn't any more order? Like, what are you supposed to do? So that whole idea that Rick is still trying to keep everybody together because that was his job before, but now that job isn't a thing and people are just trying to survive, it really creates for an interesting scenario and an interesting set of situations. So I think Rick Grimes' character is great. Is he my favorite? No. But I think he's absolutely an amazing character to follow in the series. Rick then runs into Morgan and his son, and while I didn't really understand what the big hype was about Morgan, because I know they brought Morgan in Fear the Walking Dead, which I've watched most of that, not all of it. It got crappy pretty fast, not gonna lie. The fact that Morgan is the first person that he runs into, and then Morgan comes into the series a little bit later, and you see this juxtaposition of two guys that more or less kind of started at the same place. I mean, Morgan had already lost his wife at that point, so not exactly the same, but similar enough. But then seeing what happens to Morgan when he loses his son, where he absolutely goes insane. Rick does go a little bit crazy right after he loses Lori, but the thing that brings Rick back is that he has people around him who are depending on him, and these people are helping ground him. Morgan didn't have anybody. So I think that that was kind of brilliant to put those two together and kind of see what happens the longer these people are left out to their own devices. Next, I want to talk about Shane and Lori and Rick and their whole dynamic. Because in the first episode, when Rick is heading into Atlanta, we see him calling over the radio and we find the camp that Shane and Lori and Carl are at. So we know that they're still alive, and we know from the beginning of the episode that Shane and Rick are best friends. But I have to say, Shane is by far my favorite antagonist in the show. And I don't want to call him a villain because he's so well written that you can make an argument that he really isn't a villain. And personally, I think those are the best antagonist, villain, anti-hero, you know, the opposition force in any story. Those are the best types where you can make an argument that they're not. Or you can say, I actually understand where they're coming from and I don't think they're wrong. I guess some people would make that argument for Thanos, but they're just stupid. Sorry, Marvel has no place in this video. Let's continue forward. Just to give you an example of what I mean when I say antagonist. Antagonist is the opposition in a story versus the protagonist. This doesn't necessarily mean that the protagonist or the main person in the story is a good guy. It just means that the person against them is against them. Did I mention that the antagonist is against them? Like in the example, if you watch Maleficent, Maleficent is classically a villain. But in her movie, she's the protagonist and King Stefan is the antagonist. Okay, I'm beating a dead horse. Speaking of dead horses. No, wait, I still have to talk about Shane, why I like him. Okay, put a pin in the dead horse. Or rather just have a swarm of walkers go at it. The reason why I like Shane as this villain character or the antagonist, however you want to label him, okay? I like him because he's Rick's best friend, but he's also a police officer. So then Shane's response to this tragedy of the whole world ending is he makes Carl and Lori his top priority and doesn't deal with the morals of anything else. That's a coping mechanism. And each of these characters has their own coping mechanism, which I also think is really smart because people don't tend to cope in the exact same way. So I like Shane's response to the apocalypse because it shows yet another lawmaker and how they respond. Instead of trying to step up and still keep everything in order, he chooses one task, one priority, and that's what he goes to. But Shane has this other problem where he's caught in between this weird purgatory of jealousy and envy. And just a reminder, because I know that a lot of people get confused about the definitions of jealousy and envy. Jealousy is the fear of being replaced, while envy is wanting something that somebody else has. Okay? Shane is caught in this in-between because Shane and Lori genuinely thought that Rick was dead and then they got together. So you can't fault them for that. But then when Rick comes back into this picture, Shane is now fighting this whole feeling of fear of being replaced. I'm jealous that he's now taken Lori from me, but wait, Lori was never mine to begin with. And now he's like, I'm envious and I want to take her. Can you imagine dealing with that? On top of the stress of we could get attacked at any minute and we could get eaten alive. I honestly can't say that I really fault Shane for how he acted. I really can't. And the other thing that I like is that towards the end, Rick makes it abundantly clear through his words, not through the actor. The actor is like mid at best. I just gotta put that in there. Not the best actor, but the dialogue makes it clear. He knows that Shane and Lori were together. He knows all of this nonsense, but he also knows that that was an impossible situation. So Rick, even though he wants to knock Shane's teeth out and kick the out of him for macking on his wife, Rick knows it was an impossible situation and Rick knows better. This shows that Rick actually is able to analyze things and to think, okay, I'm gonna think before I act rather than just beating somebody's skull in. That's why I really appreciate this dynamic. Oh my god, look over there! There's a horse getting eaten by walkers and some idiot crawled into a tank! Ah! Yeah, we're moving forward because, girl, I gotta go somewhere with it. I love that moment in the tank. Rick kills the walker, considers suicide, and then Glenn calls over the radio. What are you doing, dummy? The first time that happened, my jaw dropped, and I was like, oh my god, I have to know what happens. I have to keep on watching. Absolutely insane, amazing storytelling. Yeah, so then the characters that they're with, Glenn is fine. I have no complaints about Glenn. I think Glenn is relatable. I mean, he's not my favorite, but Andrea has a very interesting character arc. And one thing that I do really like about Andrea is the fact that I really don't like Andrea. Okay? She's one of those women who's just, she's a tryhard. I can do anything a man can do. Yes, you can. But should you? But here's the thing. That certainly has a place here in the apocalypse. So anyway, we'll get back to that a little bit later. The one thing that I also really like about this second episode is when Merle is introduced, how Merle is dropping a bunch of slurs and he's being a problem. What I think is super interesting about that is it's a really good, important point that even in the midst of disaster, human beings still retain their bad habits. In fact, those get amplified. And the way that it ends up that Merle is trapped on the roof, nobody feels bad that happened for Merle. Not a single person. And in fact, I didn't care much for Merle until literally right before he went and sacrificed himself in hopes that he could save Daryl. And I'll get into that in a second. And can we talk about when the rain falls down when they've covered themselves in the walker guts? I remember everybody knows that that's about to happen. Like, you could see it in the weather. But also, they didn't have much of a choice. They had to get out of there. So it was do or die. Amazing storytelling. The next character that I kind of wanted to bring up, because then they end up making it out of the city. That's amazing. That whole thing, blah, blah, blah. But the next character dynamic that I think is really interesting was Carol with her abusive husband. And I feel like as I get older, I end up consuming a lot more media about this because this is really relatable to a lot of women. But at the time, I didn't quite understand it. But looking back at Carol's resilience and her quiet strength and her also burdened sadness, how many women can relate to that on a daily basis? And you feel bad for Carol, but you also know that Carol's basically the ultimate mother. No matter how many times she gets kicked down, she's going to kick you even harder. We love her. When Daryl is first introduced, he's nothing more than a scrawny little redneck. I mean, he's really not that impressive when you first see him. But I think that that's why he ends up being such a great character, is because he grows on you, and he's a very specific type. But something that I really like about both Daryl and Carol is that their entire life before the apocalypse was survival. If you're being abused at home, you're just trying to survive every single day. So that, of course, means that when the world completely falls apart, you absolutely have the resilience to make it through. Rick comes to his senses and realizes that probably wasn't the best idea leaving Merle. And the whole debate around that, blah, 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 you can get into that. I agree with Rick. I do think they should have gone back. I think that was the right choice, you know. Shane has a good point. You're putting the group at danger. Lori, you can't leave us again. Carl needs you. Yeah, well, Carl needs to have a good example for a father at the same time. Very good situation to be having a debate about that. I like when Shane beats the crap out of Carol's husband. Oh, and then the episode, what is it? Vatos, I think is what it's called. Or Fatos, I don't know how to pronounce that. But where Jim starts the episode by digging those graves, what I noticed for a lot of the episodes in the first 2 or 3 seasons, they would show you something that would end up happening towards the end of the episode, this foreshadowing, so that you'd be kind of like, why did they show that? And then when you get to the end, you're like, oh my God, I get it now. Honestly, I miss that because it was so well done every time. I mean, the shock When Jim's digging those graves, everybody's like, dude, you're kind of freaking everybody out. Everybody's thinking, why is he digging mass graves? But nobody dares say it, right? And then that massacre at the end. That Rick and Glenn and T-Dog and Daryl all show up. Oh. Then Jim just calmly says, I remember my dream now. Absolutely horrifying. Another thing I really want to point out is that I love when these characters disappear, like Merle, and you're not sure if you're ever going to see them again, and then you kind of forget about them, and then when they show up literally a season later, and you went, whoa, didn't think they were going to bring them back. That's awesome. Okay, so then they make it to the CDC. They talk to Dr. Jenner. Dr. Jenner whispers a thing to Rick, which I had actually completely forgotten that he whispered anything to him until I rewatched it. Yeah, but the big secret that you then end up finding, oh, everybody turns into a zombie no matter what. That just wasn't surprising to me anymore because this show has been going on for so long. I didn't even remember that that was the thing he said. I don't think that that surprised me, actually, when he first said that, because that was probably something that everybody assumed. But it's just been so long that I can't tell which came first, the chicken or the egg. I think that the CDC is a very important plot point because it kind of solidifies that there's no way out of this and everything really has gone to shit. I mean, what Shane tries with Lori. Come on, guys. I'm not even going to get into that. So we're on to the second season now. They're looking for some place to go. That first part, when the herd comes, I still get chills and anxiety thinking about that. Absolutely horrifying. But then they lose Sophia and then everybody has to find her. And then they end up finding the farm. This farm that has somehow been untouched by the apocalypse. It's an impossibility, right? So we know that this farm isn't going to survive. But it's a really good place to have the second season. So if Shane wasn't a villain in your eyes after the whole CDC with Lori incident, I think the episode in the Save the Last one when he's out with Otis, that kind of solidifies it that he's just not really a team player anymore and he's probably not somebody you want to have around. A little bit unstable. I can't say for certain what episode it was that I started liking Daryl, but I suspect it was the Cherokee Rose episode when he's comforting Carol and going out and searching for Sophia. When he finds that flower and brings it back to her and says the whole story about the Native Americans. That shows a really soft side to Daryl, and it shows that he does care very deeply for those people around him. And that also explains why he's so loyal to his brother, aside from Stockholm Syndrome, abuse, family, blah, 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 right? Daryl does care. And you know by the end of that episode that even if he's gruff and says, leave me alone, and he's kind of being a tsundere, he's always going to be there for you. I also like that little reminder of hope that he gives and showing that softer moment of humanity even when the world has literally fallen apart. And can we talk about when Daryl falls off the horse and then gets stabbed by his own arrow, and then Merle is the only thing that makes him get up, but then by the end of that whole fiasco, after eating the squirrel, getting his strength, using the walker ears around his neck, he ends up looking like a zombie. And Andrea, the tryhard, is like, I can get him, I can shoot him. I love that moment because you are so keenly aware of your perspective as an onlooker. I am keenly aware of the fact that Andrea is probably going to shoot Daryl and she's probably going to kill him. Everybody knows this. And we're all like yelling at the TV screen, Andrea, stop! Andrea, you're an idiot! But also we know she's not an idiot. She has no way of knowing that that's actually Daryl. What an irritating moment. Thank God that's in my memory banks. Oh my God, then Lori tries to terminate the pregnancy. Man, I honestly can't say that I feel bad for her, but I also can't say that I don't feel bad for her. Yet another impossible situation. Then when Lori and Rick finally have that heart-to-heart, that's good to see. But then you find out about all the walkers in the barn. Oh my God. That whole thing was horrible. And then when Shane has finally had it and he lines them up and they just shoot all those walkers, that moment when Sophia comes out of the barn, I remember watching that and being so sad at that I just had to turn off the TV and I said, we're not watching that for a couple of days. I need to kind of just, it didn't make me want to not watch the show, but the shock of that was very effective. The next little bit where Beth goes comatose, Maggie's kind of the only one that accepts it, and then Herschel just kind of is MIA. I get it. The whole thing with Tony, and then when they pick up Randall, I get that little bit. It's not my favorite. It was an interesting plot point. I don't really feel like talking about it. But again, you've got this juxtaposition of Rick and Shane, and it's just gorge between them just keeps on getting wider. One thing that I do really like, like is probably not the right way to say that, but this whole little bit with Beth saying, I just want to end it, and Andrea having gone through that same thing. What I really like about this is everybody's like, stay away from Beth, and Andrea says, well, if you want her to stick around, she has to make the choice herself. So Andrea leaves the bathroom door open for her. Beth tries it, realizes she still wants to be around, and everybody's pissed at Andrea, but Andrea says she wants to live. That's very powerful. And that's, again, why I love to hate Andrea, but I also love Andrea at the same time. I don't agree with her on a lot of things, but she's effective. The only thing I'm going to say about the whole bit with Carl and the walker and then Dale's death is every side character who gets an arc in one episode, is going to most likely die by the end of that episode. And that whole thing with Carl just showed me that parenting is difficult whether or not there are zombies in the mix. The standoff with Shane and Rick at the end, everybody knew what was coming. And the fact that Rick points out I gave him so many chances, it was inevitable. It still hurts. And then, of course, we've got the colossal amount of walkers that overrun the farm. The brilliance of them going into a prison for the next season cannot be overstated. Never in a million years would I have thought of that. But where else would be as safe during the end of the world? It's meant to keep people in and other things out. Wow. Literally perfect. Michonne is introduced. I don't mind Michonne's character. I don't find her super interesting, but I'm not gonna lie, I often wonder if that's due to the actor playing her. I think she has the look. Not quite sure the acting skills are quite where I'd like them to be, but it works well enough. This is also the season where the governor is introduced, and I didn't initially understand the governor when I first started watching this, but upon rewatching it, you kind of realize he's every relatable white dude who had a simple 9-to-5 job, isn't particularly extraordinary, had a wife and a daughter, and now in the apocalypse, he's got a taste of power, and he's keeping people protected. And the way he's doing it is just by murdering everybody else and taking their stuff. Which is not how Rick does things. Rick is taking on this mantle of care, which means he's become a dictator, but he's a fair dictator. If there's such a thing as a fair dictator. Really odd situation all around. But that's why I think the governor is actually a really good antagonist then to come in after Shane. I still think Shane is the best in the series, but the governor is definitely an excellent follow-up right after that. I think the intensity and the chaos that surrounds when Lori gives birth is awesome. It's horrible, but it's awesome. And I like that right before Lori dies, she makes up with Carl, because Lori's been kind of on everybody's poopy-doopy list. And then Rick's subsequent temporary descent into madness. My brother doesn't like that part too terribly much. And I don't remember if it was just because he didn't quite understand it when we first watched it, or if he still doesn't like it. But when I rewatched it, I got it. But I've just recently lost a family member, so I now kind of understand grief. When we were younger and we hadn't actually lost somebody in our family, that was kind of hard to grasp that. At least it was for me. But Rick picking up the phone and having that moment where he's going crazy, I mean, I'm surprised he didn't do worse. I mean, of course, he went through and he killed all of those walkers in that insane rampage. Insane, but awesome rampage. But him being on the phone and going crazy. And then the other people getting into the prison. And the thing that I like is that the entire group agrees that Rick is in charge, and they almost treat him with this kind of tenderness, especially because he just lost Lori. But that's another thing that I have found with losing someone. It's almost immediately not replaced. Replaced is not the right word, but it comes back full circle with a new life being brought in. And I think that that is a good symbol of hope. And it's funny that you've got this symbol of hope in the middle of everything when it's falling apart. Judith's birth is quite an intense thing, and it's really an amazing episode and then a couple of episodes of how Rick deals with that. The fact that Merle shows back up in such a spectacularly, delightfully Igor-ish kind of way. He's doing whatever the governor tells him to do, and the governor's putting on a good face, but Merle has no problem doing all of the grunt work. And Andrea is drawn in by this, but Michonne isn't. This is one thing I appreciate about Michonne. Michonne gets people, and Michonne has a good BS detector. That whole episode where Merle has those other 2 or 3 guys that are out trying to kill Michonne, and Merle at a certain point is like, not really worth it anymore. But then the one guy's like, no, we have to go and kill her. And then Merle's like, whatever. And he just kills the other guy. Merle, in that moment, I really started to like him, even though he's a jerk. It's that whole thing where I kind of laugh at inappropriate times because you gotta be kidding me, dude. Merle, what are you doing? Michonne gets away, and then Merle ends up taking Glenn and Maggie, and Michonne shows up at the prison with the formula. That was a pretty badass entrance for her at the prison. I'm not gonna lie, I really did love that. So the next sequence really drives home this idea that the governor really has deteriorated into a bad guy. Assuming maybe before the world went to garbage, he wasn't. I don't really feel like getting into that. What happened to Glenn and Maggie? No bueno. The part where Michonne then takes out the governor's eye, what is so intense about that sequence is you see all of the fish tanks. And then when she goes to save the little girl, only to find he literally has kept this walker version of his daughter. A lot of people have a hard time letting go of their loved one, even though their loved one is a monster trying to eat them. What a great metaphor for actual life, when there aren't zombies. They get back to the prison and Rick is going crazy again. But I like that sequence because it really shows he's not infallible and he is getting crushed under the weight of all of this. Which makes that even more amazing that he's able to keep going. And then this next part with Daryl and Merle, when Merle finally sees that, oh, Daryl was also getting beaten like I was, I really appreciate that moment because siblings who have a difficult time with their parents, they never know how much the other one is suffering until one of them actually tells them. Which sounds so duh, but when you're growing up and you've got a difficult situation, you don't know any better. So this was a moment for them to come together, and then Merle, you can see the gears starting to work. He's like, I really do need to take care of my little brother. It's better if I'm with him than if I'm away from him. That moment when Axel gets shot while talking to Carol, that was I hated that. And I'm sure everybody hated that because you were just starting to warm up to Axel. But I was like, oh man. The governor shows up. At this point, it's total hatred towards the governor in my eyes. Like, I've had it with this guy. He's protecting this environment that he's created himself. It's not a healthy one. But the governor's like, I'm going to take you guys out because I can't be living with you here. You know, he has to protect his bad deeds. And then Rick is not giving up the prison. And what's funny, the only thing I remembered before I started watching this, I thought that the governor just wiped them out immediately. I forgot that they actually do end up defending the prison and winning. And then it's a couple episodes into the 4th season that they lose the prison because the governor comes back. So funny how I completely missed that, because it's awesome how they defend the prison. Okay, I'll rewind a little bit, but I don't want to take too much time on the rest of this because the 4th season is kind of where I want to focus the rest of the video on if I can. The episode where they find Morgan, again, that's really interesting because Morgan goes crazy and Rick just kind of escaped going completely crazy. So that juxtaposition is very interesting. I'm not really a fan of Tyrese's group. I don't mind Tyrese or Sasha, but I never really cared for them as characters. And again, I don't know if that has to do with how well the actors portray it or just the characters themselves. Like, they're not bad, but for as long as they stuck around, I went, why are they still here? Anybody else feel that way? Sorry if that's your favorite character. They're just, you know, whatever. But maybe I just didn't like them so much because they were the ones who kind of gave the governor a little bit more information than he wouldn't have had otherwise. But again, I get that that was a plot device. Andrea trying to play peacemaker is really interesting. And again, why I really don't like Andrea. But I also can't help but understand her. I get it. And when Carol has that line, well, you need to sleep with him and then you need to unalive him. And then when she's actually in that moment, and then I think the episode ends where you just don't know what she's going to do. And then you find she didn't end up unaliving him. She's choosing to be amicable and trying to get them to talk to each other. So when she's ultimately unalived by Milton, and the only thing she says is, I just didn't want anyone else to die. You cannot fault her for her actions at all. She's still trying to hold on to her humanity. And I have to say, that episode where she escapes and tries to make it to the prison and the governor is chasing her, my heart was pounding. That's got to be one of their best episodes. And I say that as somebody who didn't even really like Andrea. What, the episode Prey? Yeah, Prey. Absolutely intense. And the fact that Andrea makes it to the prison and then he's still alive and catches up to her, you're like, oh my God. I definitely cried when Merle died because he made a sacrifice for his brother and he almost accomplished his goal. He almost took out the governor. He took out a fair amount of them, but not the governor himself. What I think is so amazing about that character development is literally the first time we're introduced to Merle, he's dropping slurs and he's making it difficult on everyone. He's still acting and speaking from this place of trauma. But after he realized that Daryl had just as hard of a time as he did, Daryl just wasn't as loud about it. And then Merle decides he's going to sacrifice himself in the name of helping his brother. That is one of the most beautiful character development arcs, even though it still ends with a death. It's very noble, and it again solidifies how dangerous of a man the governor is and how difficult of a task it's going to be to get rid of him. The governor rallies his troops, they attack the prison, they lose, Rick's group wins, and then the governor mows down all of his people, and then Rick takes them in, and that's how the 3rd season ends. It's nice to have a win at the end of one of the seasons, because the first 2 seasons, it didn't feel like they were winning. It still felt like they were running. So now we're on to the 4th season, which I personally find the most interesting looking back at it. It wasn't my favorite season. It still isn't my favorite season, just in general. But I think that the dynamics between the different characters, especially when they get separated after the prison goes up in flames, is what I find super interesting. Because you have how people work within a group and the group dynamics, but then when that group splits off and it's less people, you see them acting in different ways or revealing more of themselves. There's more attention on them, so you get to know them better. I find everything about the setup of this season brilliant. I love the title of the first episode, 30 Days Without an Accident, because then it ends with Beth taking down that sign, 0 days without an accident. But I like this setup because everything's peaceful. Even when it's peaceful and there isn't an actual enemy that you can detect, there's still something that can happen. And I mean, even that whole thing of them walking into that grocery store, it being clear, but then the helicopter falling through, they had no way of knowing that was on the roof. But again, it's like they had no way of knowing that that walker was infected. Brilliant. But then they set it up with Carol with the kids, so you know that something's going to happen with that after you get later into the season. It makes sense. Or Beth's apathy with Zach and Daryl kind of seeing that. Or even Bob and Sasha. I like those two's dynamic, even though I'm not really a huge fan of Sasha. Or even Tyrese and Karen. And also seeing Rick trying to rebuild his relationship with Carl and trying to teach Carl how to still be a man in this world, or even just be a human. Him trying to instill these morals when you're in a seemingly moralless landscape. And then the episode ending Patrick getting sick. Wow. I can't even begin to say how horrifying that is. But then they fight through these first couple of episodes trying to contain this disease. I can't say that I would have done the same thing that Carol did in that situation, but I appreciate her doing that for the plot furtherment, because then seeing her dynamic later with Tyrese, especially after she's the one who got rid of Karen, trying to keep the camp safe, that's a hell of a dynamic. And then when Tyrese forgives her, it's really well written. And we know that Tyrese is a good guy from the first time he's introduced, but having that reinforced is really nice. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, I kind of started to hate him when he inadvertently started revealing that stuff to the governor. So I find that really brilliant, and I really like those episodes, especially when Herschel steps up, and Herschel's the most at risk. He's the oldest, but he says, I can't just sit by and let this happen. Herschel's a badass, let me say. And I do like the reemergence of the governor. Of course, I don't like that there was basically no time between them beating the infection and then the governor popping up. But those couple of episodes with the governor where he reclaims this family he's lost with this new family, only to build it all back up again and watch it fall apart. That's a really good point, because when you take over that way, it never ever ends well. Lying to the people that you're in charge of is not the way to do it. But then the not so symbolic way that the daughter dies and then the wife shows up with her in her arms, absolutely crazy. And I don't know about you guys, but when Herschel, his head gets cut off, that's still really hard for me to watch, because that's like a core memory for me now. Because, I mean, who didn't love Herschel? Come on. Herschel was the old guy keeping everybody in check. Okay, so the first dynamic I'm going to cover is Carl and Rick. Because another thing that I really like about this general area that everybody gets lost in, they all end up crossing paths at certain points and they're not aware that they kind of ran into each other. The whole thing where Rick is just passed out on the couch and Carl's like, I don't need you. Carl goes and gets the pudding. One of my absolute favorite moments, by the way. Him sitting on the roof eating the pudding. Like, I'm going to make an illustration of that. I have to. But then Carl coming to his senses and saying, Dad, I need you. And then that moment where you think Rick has turned into a walker and he reaches for him. That shows just how young and scared Carl really is, even if he's trying to act like he isn't. He's still a kid. I mean, a reminder we didn't need, but amazingly written.
But then how the people break into the house, that biker gang or whatever they were, and that episode where Rick is hiding from them the entire time. Oh my God, that had me on the edge of my seat. And then for later, Daryl to run into them, and then Rick just going absolutely ape on them. Wow. Something you did not see coming, but definitely something you won't forget. Something that you'll never forget. Look at the flowers, Lizzie. Need I say more? The horror and the shock of when Lizzie does that to her sister. Wow. And then you feel really bad for Carol because she just seems to have this pattern of losing children. There are people who feel like that where they just keep on losing. So I think she's definitely relatable. But again, that's why Carol's probably one of the strongest characters. Glenn using the riot gear to break out was really badass. And then him saving Tara. Tara's also not one of my favorite characters. She's slightly entertaining. Then them running into Eugene, Rosita, and Abraham. I mean, they're fine. I think it's an interesting plot point, and it makes for an interesting dynamic. Eugene in particular, him being so smart, but being so scared. I think the greatest part of all of this is when the train tracks, they find the train tracks, and then they go towards Terminus. And then you've got Maggie, Sasha, and Bob. And on this next part, I'm going to bring my brother to talk about.
All right, so now we're at the part where Sasha and Maggie are having their silly little heart-to-heart on the train tracks. And the only thing going through our head is, go get Bob, right? The only thing I felt the entire time I was watching it was, let's go get Bob. But I'd like your opinion on this, dear brother.
Yes, I believe the technical term I felt was called because, I mean, it was really dumb. And to this day, I'm glad I'm not Maggie's friend because if I was kidnapped, I'm glad to know that feelings are more important than friendship.
Honestly, the entire time, I mean, I literally remember sitting there with you. Weren't we yelling at the TV? Just go get Bob!
Yeah, we were.
Yeah, we were absolutely.
Then they have the audacity to end the scene of saying, let's go get Bob. And it's like, what? It's like, what are you doing? Like, this is not, like, so I get it's a fictional world full of whatever rules that don't make any sense. But, like, oh my gosh, it didn't make any sense. And they're all dealing with Terminus, and it's like issues. Let's go get Bob.
Let's go get Bob. Stop talking and get it done. That's literally, yeah. So childhood memory, childhood trauma unlocked. Thank you, dear brother. You may depart now. But where are you going to go and who are you going to get?
Let's go get Bob.
Let's go get Bob.
I find Beth and Daryl's dynamic the one I relate to the most and the one that I'm most interested in. Hence why I'm drawing this right here. When Beth and Daryl are first separated from everyone, again, this is not a likely pairing. Like, it's one that honestly surprised me. However, opposites do attract. I like the fact that they are put together because their reactions are opposite. Daryl just wants to keep on going. They're gone. We can't do anything about it. And Beth is like, no, we have to go back and we have to help them. Beth definitely would have gone to go get Bob. And we also see that it takes a while for them to warm up to each other. They're not happy about being stuck with each other. Beth's reach to try to find any last connection with her father is going and getting a drink. They find the golf course. And that moment when Beth puts on the same sweater as the rich bitch corpse that's on the wall. And Beth says, help me get her down. Daryl says, it doesn't matter. She's dead. And Beth saying, it does matter. You already see that she's starting to kind of open him up in a way that we haven't seen before. And then Daryl ends up just putting the blanket over the corpse, which is a happy medium. That's progress. They find the peach schnapps. Beth starts crying, especially after Daryl points out that it's not a good first drink. And then Daryl decides that he's going to go find her a proper first drink, moonshine. They end up at Daryl's home sweet home, if you will. It's not his actual home, but it's literally exactly the kind of circumstances he grew up in. And they both get drunk, and they have it out. They get in this huge fight, but at the end of it, you see that Daryl feels extremely guilty, which is something that if you don't know that character type, you you wouldn't expect. He's gruff. He doesn't get along with people. He doesn't care about anyone. Just because he doesn't show his emotions doesn't mean he doesn't care. He just bottles them down. And Daryl's been so beat down his entire life. How else is he supposed to react? So Beth going and comforting him. And then when they're sitting there talking and she says, "You're going to miss me so much, Daryl Dixon, when I'm gone." And then he mentions, "I'm a sad drunk." That's a really sad line, especially when you know what ends up happening to Beth. They burn down the house. Awesome scene. I love that. And then you see that Daryl's really warming up to her. And she's just happy to be there. I really like that moment when they find the little mortuary or funeral house. Same word, I guess. And she reminds Daryl that that's beautiful that somebody still cares and remembers that these were people. Yeah, her foot's hurt, so he's carrying her. I thought that was just super sweet anytime he would carry her. But I'm a romantic, what can I say? And then the moment that I also really like is where she's playing the piano, and then Daryl's kind of watching in the background, and then she stops. He hops into the coffin, again, hilarious, and tells her to keep on playing. And she says, "Well, I thought my singing annoyed you." Wow, yeah, well, there ain't no jukebox. I like the softness she brings out in him, and I like that we get to know more about Daryl that way. So then when Beth ends up getting taken, that was such a big moment, especially for me and my siblings, because we're like, no! But then when you get into the 5th season, and they just needlessly unalive Beth, that really upsets me, because talk about the wasted potential. Beth wasn't an important enough character, but also I don't think she was important enough to unalive. I think there was a lot they could have done with that storyline with her and Daryl, especially because Daryl is built for this world. So seeing him actually thriving and potentially maybe they could have had a family or something, there's so many things you could have done with that dynamic, but getting rid of Beth, nothing. And I don't like what they've done with Daryl since, except for when I started watching the Daryl Dixon show. But that whole idea of wasted potential, it's like when Bob gets bit and then the cannibals eat the tainted meat. And then they didn't have the cannibals go crazy or get violent ill or, no consequences for it. Talk about how amazing and impactful that would have been if they all just died from that. A stark reminder, hey, don't eat people. As if it's not bad enough that the zombies are out doing that. Humans shouldn't be doing it either. Oh my god, you guys. We made it to the end. Are you still here? My dog's walking away. He's had enough of that nonsense. Well, here's the finished piece. Tell me what you think. You literally watched me paint the entire thing. I used the Kuretake GANSAI TAMBI watercolors. I love how they layer. I think they look absolutely beautiful. But I chose this to do a painting of because this was kind of the moment where their relationship changed and they started opening up to each other. Anyway, let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you agree with what I've said? Please let me know. And I will absolutely see you in the next one. Thanks for being here, friends. Bye!